welcome to the Echo Tips Podcast. In this week's episode, we're going to be delving back into that treasure trove of different announcements from Amazon about some of the new software upgrades, features, and the like coming to the Echo, or already now, on the Echo, basically. And in particular, we're going to be taking a look at a skill that's been around for a long time, but I feel like is getting a little more respect and kind of like native features that it really needs, and that is the Apple Podcast skill. So we're going to be taking a look at that. Apple has kind of the premier database of podcast, and after all, that's kind of where we get the word podcast from, basically from the old iPod and RSS feeds that would update people about audio segments to their favorite shows and things like that. So we're going to basically be taking a look at how that's new and these new features. And but before we get into that in any sort of detail, we're going to go to a brief message about our podcast, and then we'll be right back. This episode is brought to you by New Vision at Goodwill Industries of the Valleys, and also made possible in part by a grant from the Virginia Board for the Blind and Vision Impaired. New Vision is a program of Goodwill that provides information services and assistive technology training to individuals with visual impairments. Goodwill Industries of the Valleys is a nonprofit organization serving Central, Southwest, and Southside Virginia. Goodwill's mission is to empower individuals, strengthen families, and inspire communities. These shows are provided for educational purposes. This podcast may not be retransmitted, sold, or reproduced without written permission from New Vision. Well, hello again and welcome back to the podcast. As I mentioned earlier today, we're going to be delving into some new announcements connected with the Apple Podcast skill. I was trying earlier not to say app because I keep thinking iPhone and app, but the Apple Podcast skill. It's a mouthful. Anyway, and we're going to be talking a little more about that. First off, though, I will mention to our new listeners, we'd like to welcome you. My name is David Ward. I'm an assistive technology instructor with the New Vision program at Goodwill, here based in Southwest Virginia. It's good to have you with us. You'll find that our episodes, if you are unfamiliar, are little nuggetized episodes, 5 to 15 minutes long. Occasionally, like maybe an episode back or so, I went a little longer than that, but there was a lot to say, but we try to keep it on the shorter side of things, and we try to release our episodes once a week, usually around Wednesday. Okay, so anyhow, the podcast. Oh, and I would like to say welcome back to our returning listeners as well, and we're breaking around 100,000 listens to the 5 years of episodes that we have, the 5th season we're in now. Okay, so what can I tell? Where should we start? Podcasts are a pretty common phenomenon. It's basically for those that are uninitiated, are like on-demand radio. So if you think of Netflix as on-demand television, podcasts allow for on-demand radio shows, or it could be dramas, it could be talk kind of radio shows, could almost anything audio. So really, that's really where it comes from. Now, podcast, as the name implies, and it's apt for today because we're talking about Apple, had the iPod as an MP3 portable player years ago. Before there was an iPhone, before there was an iPad, there was an iPod, and that's where kind of the nomenclature has kind of come from, that kind of podcasts. And so anyhow, that's where it comes from. So as a result of that legacy and the fact that we still use that term, because Apple was really known for aggregating a huge database of free podcasts. Now they do have a paid-for system nowadays, but still it's predominantly thought of as free podcast, just a huge database. Because of that, they're kind of like the premier granddaddy of them all, of having really amazing podcasts, just sheer volume of podcast, and of course you can play them on your iPhone and iPad natively. There's a native support for that. Okay, so this kind of support has been on the Echo, the Amazon Echo line of devices for a long time, but you had to invoke it like your typical skill, basically. Now, you had a little bit of flexibility. You could say, hey, lady, play, Echo Tips podcast on Apple. And you could do that. And you still can do that. But we're getting some nice, more native functionality. So the headline from the news event here is resume listening to podcast with the updated Apple podcast skill. So I wasn't one that used it as my default provider, so I probably never picked up on this, but the resume feature apparently wasn't there before. So that kind of really would have been a real downer, that you come back and maybe like some podcasts I have are like an hour or two long, and I come back and maybe I've only listened to half of it, right? And I won't have to start at the beginning and fast forward or anything like that. Not that I can't do that. I could say, hey, lady, go forward 1 hour. It's just, it's nice to be able to just pick up from where I left off. So now with this native integration, and upgraded features with the Apple Podcast skill, you get that functionality. So I went onto my iPhone, or you could go onto a tablet or wherever, where you have the A-Lady app, and you could go into Skills and search the Skills Store, and for Apple Podcasts, just search for Apple Podcasts with an S on the end, and you'll see it near the top. And from there, you can enable that. Now, something neat I discovered, and it's probably been there for a while, and I'm not too sure if they expanded the feature set here. There's nothing in this blog post about it. But one of the things is you can link it to your iDevice if you have an iPhone or iPad, and your account, and that way there's some correlation. It appears some data. If you were listening to the podcast on your iPhone or had a series of podcasts in there, that might help inform the A-Lady. And it would be really cool too if it can see that, you left off at this place an hour into the show on your phone, but now you're standing in your office and it picks up where you left off. So I get the impression that that's basically why it has that correlation, that you can sign in with your Apple account to make that connection. So anyway, let's give it a try. If you have an Echo in hearing distance of me and you don't want me triggering your Echo, you might want to take a real quick second or pause the podcast and shut her ears off. Just mute her ears, or okay, just give a second to do that, and now we're going to give this a try. So I made that change. I enabled the skill. Actually, it was already enabled, because like I said, this has been around a long time. I did go in though and do the linking. Like I said, I linked it to because I am an iPhone user, and I linked it to my Apple account. So we'll see how that unfolds in the weeks to come. And I did enjoy Amazon. I really did enjoy. Feel like you did this right. After I did it, I was prompted, what would I like to change my podcast provider for default? So whenever you walk over to the Echo, sorry, I'm rambling on without the demo here. Whenever you walk over to the Echo and you say, play whatever podcast, play This Week in Google, play a Windows Weekly podcast, when you do that, it just natively goes to its default provider. So in most cases, probably that's going to be the Amazon Music podcast store in their database. Now, in ancient times, way back when, it would pull from the TuneIn database. And it still can do that. You can specifically say, play yada, yada, yada from TuneIn. Or podcast on TuneIn or Spotify. You got options now. And you can do it with Apple as well. But once you've changed your provider to the default, then it just preferentially treats it that way. So let's give it a try. Now, what would be a good thing to do? Let's see. Okay, so first I think what we want to do is go to my iPhone, and I'm going to use the podcast app. Now that I have these two things just connected, just for kicks and giggles, you may never use this, and I honestly don't use the traditional podcast app on the iPhone. I use the Pocket Cast. I think it's by Shifty Jelly or somebody. But anyway, I think it's owned by WordPress maybe now. But anyway.
8:39 a.m.
So here's my iPhone, and I'm going to tap on this podcast main menu.
And if you follow the prompt there, it would download that installation and start the installation.
Hopefully you can hear that pretty well. It's just coming out of my phone.
If you don't have automatic updates turned on, or you have a firewall or anything that's preventing it, you can of course go download it as we've always been able to do from the
Okay, so now I've paused that. Now, in theory, that's supposed to synchronize potentially, I believe, based on the account connection. And it seemed to work so far pretty good. Let me give it a try. You just heard where we left off. Alexa, play main menu podcast.
Getting main menu from Apple Podcasts. Resuming 20,221,026.
Okay,
main menu
right.
live.
This is
Ryan
right.
Jones from Vispero.
Okay.
Bob Rome from Envision Glasses. And Dimash Thomas on Password Managers.
Site. I always encourage people to go to the Freedom Scientific website and read the What's New pages. And that's where you really get some more detailed information.
Okay, so I believe that is pretty much in the exact same general region
evening. So there's going to be a
that
lot
we
more
were
detail
on the
about
app.
Zoom
And if you
text,
go
Fusion,
conversely,
and JAWS and
like I experimented with this where I fast-forwarded like 5 or 10 minutes, kind of got an idea what they were talking about. I stopped it on the Echo and went back to my phone. Seems to be working pretty good. So if you're a big podcast app person on the iPhone or iPad, this might be an easy way to go. So let me stop her here. Alexa, stop. Now, most users probably are going to do that. I'm a traditional. I just typically use just the podcast right on the Echo. Well, actually, I got a crazy way of doing it now. But anyway, that's what most people would do. And traditionally with the Amazon Music, as we mentioned, it remembers your resume play. Now, in my first demo of this, I tried to use several podcasts off the Twit network, which none of them worked. And I always have trouble with their stuff. It's staying in sync while I'm playing it. I mean, it literally will jump around the podcast sometimes. I've had that happen on multiple Echoes, I believe, and I've also, this resume feature doesn't seem to work. But apart from that, I couldn't find another podcast that it didn't work on. So let me give you an example. I was listening to Double Tap Canada yesterday. Alexa, play Double Tap Canada.
Playing Double Tap from Apple Podcasts.
I
Resuming
guess
Weekend
here's a
Edition.
podcast, but she
Elon
figured it
Musk
out.
and Twitter. iPads running Mac
And here
OS
she's pulling
and
from
Prime
Apple,
Music for
so
everyone.
that's...
Shut down at around 8 o'clock at night. So 8 o'clock at night.
So there you go. See, she just resumed wherever I had left off yesterday. So I could listen to, I could have jumped around to multiple podcasts, came back to this one, and it would have picked up where I left off, just like the Amazon Music interface works. So very, very, very cool, wonderful. It's really messed me up because I tried to do this demo originally with Twit, like I said, This Week in Tech content, and I couldn't get any of it to work. But the resume feature seems to work, so it may vary from your podcast to podcast, depending on maybe the file type or something. I have no idea. But I have not experienced it with the other 5 or 6 podcasts that I've tried. The resume works. So just bear that in mind. And plus, I actually sat down and experimented here with the podcast app on the phone. So very happy to see that. Anyway, don't mind my phone ringing there. See, you got to mute your phone when you're in a podcast. Anyway, so that will bring this episode to the particular demo to a close. All right, so anyway, that kind of brings this episode to a close. It's time to turn the ears back on your Echo, start practicing some of the many things that you've learned. I'm David Ward for the New Vision program. Oh, and I forgot I was going to mention ways to reach out and share thoughts or comments. Now, I haven't mentioned this one very much, but you can go. Our podcast is hosted on Anchor.fm. Thank you to Anchor. That's ANCHOR.fm. .com. If you went .fm, what am I saying? .fm. If you went /echo-tips, I believe you'd land right on our page. You can actually submit audio commentaries or questions there if you have an account, I assume. And that's kind of a neat feature. Of course, you can reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter at Goodwill Industries of the Valleys. And you're also welcome to email us at info@goodwillvalleys.com. All right, well, until next time, turn the ears back on your Echo, and we thank you for listening.
Thanks, Dave. Let me tell you a bit more. Let me put on my official sounding voice. Ahem. Ahem. This episode is brought to you by New Vision at Goodwill Industries of the Valleys and also made possible in part by a grant from the Virginia Board for the Blind and Vision Impaired. New Vision is a program of Goodwill that provides information services and assistive technology training to individuals with visual impairments. Goodwill Industries of the Valleys is a nonprofit organization serving Central, Southwest, and Southside Virginia. Goodwill's mission is to empower individuals, strengthen families, and inspire communities. These shows are provided for educational purposes. This podcast may not be retransmitted, sold, or reproduced without written permission from New Vision. Phew. Thanks for listening.